welcome to the final session of this colloquium. My name is Dion Nkomo of Rhodes University, but I'm chairing this session as a member of COPA. In this session, we'll be dealing with the reimagining of engagement and transformation as important aspects of language policy. You'll remember, colleagues, the chairperson of USAF, Dr. Mabizela, actually underlined the importance of language as an important issue of transformation, social justice, institutional culture, and I think this thread came out through the previous presentations. In this session, we have three main presenters. That is Prof. Wim de Villiers of the Vice Chancellor of Stellenbosch University. We also have Prof. Francis Petersen, the Vice Chancellor of Free State University. And then we'll end with Prof. Mamchet Pakeng of UCT. But before we get to those speakers, I would call upon Prof. Ahmed Bauer to give us some general remarks before we kick off this session. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you so much, Professor Nkomo, and good afternoon again, colleagues. It's been an absolutely wonderful set of presentations and discussion up to now. The transformation of our university system is an ongoing challenge. I mean, it's something that we've been working on since 1994, and it's an ongoing project, and it's something that we have to keep working at. And I think that what we've seen in the last period of time are really kind of major challenges that have been placed before the universities, like, for example, the massive challenges around student funding, the Rhodes Must Fall campaign, and now, of course, more recently, COVID-19. And each of these has really placed the spotlight on the transformation challenges that the university system faces. Interestingly, through all of those challenges, the issue of language is completely interwoven. And therefore, it seems to me that when we deal with the issue of transformation, we have to integrate into into the challenges that are taken up by the transformation efforts that we undertake, the issue of language. And I think we heard today, you know, that the extent to which the language issue is integrated into issues around access and success, issues around ensuring that universities are more broadly accepted by the communities and so on. So there are three major issues, it seems to me, that would be addressed have to be addressed by the language issue. The first one is the issue of the social ownership of our universities. Just the basic understanding that our universities are public institutions and they have to be socially owned. And the question for me then, the question that we have to pose then is just to what extent, will universities be socially owned if they do not kind of embody the general culture of our society, if you like. The second is what has been spoken about quite a lot today. It's the issue around access and success, and I won't go into that again. But the third one, of course, is the issue around engagement. You know, and when I speak about engagement, I'm not speaking just about community engagement, but it's about universities and society. And if we think about the fact that so much of our research, the research enterprise at our universities, has to do with the social context in which the universities operate, it's then completely clear, in fact, that language is central to that enterprise. So it seems to me that if we are talking about the transformation of our sector, then the language issue is completely interwoven into that. It reminds me of something that I experienced in Brazil once, some years ago, when I met a master's student who was working, an anthropology student who was working with a community in rural, in the Amazon, basically. And so I asked the student, how far have you gone with your project? And the student had already spent 1 year in the Amazon, basically learning the language of the people, because the underlying challenge for the student was, as an anthropologist, was that unless she understood the local language and was able to communicate in the local language, that that study would not be a viable study, if you like. So with that, I mean, I think we are very privileged today to have these three super vice chancellors, and I'm really looking forward to listening to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. May I please call upon Prof. de Villiers to come and address us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Nkoma, and thank you very much also, Professor Bawa, for that introduction. And it has certainly been a fascinating discussion thus far. So thank you for the opportunity to also speak. So I'm going to be addressing some of the challenges in the implementation of the new language policy framework for public higher education institutions. And I will touch on how Stellenbosch University approaches the implementation of our own language policy within the context of the new language policy framework. So, starting with the new language policy framework, according to a policy advocacy brief entitled Why and How Africa Should Invest in African Languages and Multilingual Education, published in 2010 by the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning in partnership with the Association for the Development for Education in Africa, there is more than enough evidence that multilingualism is an asset to the development of a nation. And the brief made recommendations for policy making in multicultural and multilingual Africa. And one recommendation is this: normalize multilingualism for social cohesion, individual and social development through language policies that build on the natural mastery of 2 or more languages. And such policies should be embedded in the social vision for a country, operationalized in legislation, and reflected in planning, budgeting, and research covering all societal sectors. End of quote. And in terms of this recommendation specifically, it actually seems like higher education in South Africa is on the right track, and normalizing multilingualism is in part what the new policy framework is trying to achieve. And as stated, South Africa's approach to multilingualism is embedded in the 1996 Constitution and recognizes 11 official languages. But implementing a multilingual approach presents many challenges. We have policy, and then we have implementation. And the implementation challenges range from financial implications, lack of investment in multilingualism in basic education, bridging the gap between high school and higher education, and the continued trend towards the globalization, internationalization, and Englishification of higher education. So as you're all aware, back in 2002, the then Minister of Education developed and promulgated the previous language policy for higher education. And the aim of that policy was to promote multilingualism in institution policies and practices of South African public higher education institutions. But again, the reality of implementing such a policy is complicated. And we now have this new language policy framework for public higher education institutions. It was gazetted in October last year. It states that language continues to be a barrier to access and success for many students at South African higher education institutions. And despite their status as official languages, indigenous languages have in the past and present structurally not been afforded the official space to function as academic and scientific languages. And then the policy framework goes on to say that since the promulgation of the previous language policy, the 2002 policy, there have been various initiatives on the part of DHET to monitor progress and assess the extent to which institutional practices are actually in line with national policy, but they've not been deemed successful. And it thus brings us to the current policy framework, the one promulgated in October 2020. And I quote from the gazetted preamble: "It seeks to address the challenge of the underdevelopment and underutilization of official African languages at higher education institutions, whilst simultaneously sustaining the standard and utilization of languages that are already developed." And herein lies one of the main challenges: simultaneously sustaining and developing different languages that are already developed. And Afrikaans' status as indigenous language is another challenge presented by the new policy framework, but I'll touch on that later. So I spoke about the issue about policy and implementation. Policy implementation is challenging. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD, has done extensive research specifically regarding the challenges of implementing policies across all sectors. And in its book, Tertiary Education for the Knowledge Society, it states, "A key challenge ahead for policymakers is to identify which policies would work best in their national context and circumstances. And then in a second stage, to move from knowing what changes are needed to implementing those changes successfully." And using that model in the South African national context, DHET and the USAF Community of Practice for Teaching and Learning of African Languages, or COPA, have in the first stage identified multilingualism to inform policy as a principle of the framework. And here at this colloquium, we are at the second stage, trying to figure out ways to implement it as policy and to create successful change. The OECD report gets more specific about the challenges related to higher education. And I quote again, "Tertiary education policy is relevant to and impacts on a number of different stakeholders who have an interest in tertiary education, but whose views on its roles and goals, and hence on the strategies and policies needed to achieve these goals, often diverge. And as a result, a challenging task for policymakers is to find a balance between these diverse views and aims in developing and implementing tertiary education policy so as to build consensus. And this is certainly true in the South African context as well. According to the OECD report, we have to keep in mind that different stakeholders have different requirements of policies in the higher education sector. For students and graduates, educational quality, teaching performance, and career opportunities are what matters. For employers and industry representatives, they share this concern, but they also want students to acquire the skills and attributes that will prepare them for working life. But in addition, they're interested in the capacity of higher education to contribute to research and innovation and regional development. By contrast, academics often show more interest in knowledge transfer, learning environments, the quality and motivation of students, research quality, and the level of interaction between teaching and research. Higher education managers look at the number of students, the standing of their institution, their ability to compete internationally in research, and also to have sufficient autonomy to fulfill their mission. Whilst government authorities, as significant funders of higher education, they are concerned with the efficient allocation of scarce public resources and hence policies enhancing value for money and accountability towards taxpayers. So framing all these different requirements within the South African context and the implementation of the new language policy framework, this confirms that the various stakeholders at universities expect different results from policies. And Gornicka in 1999 presents it like this: for organizations to change as a result of government initiatives, a normative match is necessary. It is congruence between the values and beliefs underlying a proposed program or policy and the identity and traditions of the organization. So I believe colloquia like this will really help, and really helps with this congruence. So a unique challenge presented to us, and specifically Stellenbosch University, is that the new policy framework excludes Afrikaans as an indigenous language. And this is something Stellenbosch University disagrees with and would like to see amended. Already back in 2017, in our comprehensive feedback on DHET's draft revised language policy for higher education 2017, Stellenbosch University supported the position in that draft, it was present in that draft, that Afrikaans is an indigenous language of South Africa. But unfortunately, universities were not given an opportunity to comment on the final version of the new National Language Policy Framework promulgated in October 2020. And we have since brought this matter to the attention of University of South Africa, and we have stated from the release of this new policy framework that we remain committed to Afrikaans as an indigenous language as part of inclusive multilingualism. And in response to this exclusion of Afrikaans from the classification of indigenous languages in the 2020 policy framework, the Stellenbosch University Council accepted a motion at its meeting on the 21st of June 2021 that read, SU has taken note with concern of the Department of Higher Education and Training's classification of Afrikaans in the language policy framework for public higher education institutions. SU supports the view that Afrikaans and the Kru and San languages are indigenous languages, and Council requests SU's management to take appropriate steps to engage with the DHET to address this issue. Simultaneously, we're committed to developing isiXhosa as an academic language in the higher education sector. And as an emerging formal academic language, isiXhosa receives particular attention with a view to its incremental introduction into selected disciplinary domains. And these are prioritized based on student needs through a well-planned and systematic process. So SU's Department of African Languages has extensive experience in advanced level teaching and research in language and linguistic fields. And going forward, this department's academic role and leadership will be fully harnessed. isiXhosa is already being used in certain programs to facilitate effective learning and teaching, especially where it may be important for career purposes. So we're committed to increasing the use of isiXhosa to the extent that this is reasonably practicable. Examples of existing initiatives in this regard include short courses in basic isiXhosa communication skills for staff and students, career-specific communication isiXhosa, and discipline-specific terminology guides, both printed and mobile application, and phrase books. For instance, our medical students are taught vocational communication in Afrikaans and isiXhosa. Similar modules are offered in our Faculty of Education. Our Faculty of Theology offers a module that is presented in isiXhosa and interpreted into Afrikaans and English. And excellent work is also being done in the extended degree program in our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, where isiXhosa and other interpreting is used as one of the faculty's initiatives to promote multilingualism. The Language Center at SU also translates podcasts and other learning and teaching material into isiXhosa and a mobile application known as Mobilex that was created in the Faculty of Education to provide students with access to multilingual glossaries in specific subjects. the platform provides subject-specific terminology in 3 languages, Afrikaans, English, and isiXhosa, as well as definitions of terms in each of these languages, and thus providing language support as well as conceptual language knowledge support on an undergraduate level in the faculty. And since 2014, this platform and its subsequent multilingual glossaries have been expanded and currently actually include terms and definitions for the faculties of education, theology, arts and social sciences, science, as well as economic and management science. This is a unique project in higher education, in the higher education sector, because although several universities in South Africa and elsewhere have developed terminology lists, these lists are 1, not available online, 2, not available in a user-friendly, tailor-made mobile application format, 3, are not open sourced, and 4, they're not on undergraduate level and does not include Afrikaans or isiXhosa. But the challenge, however, is to keep this momentum going and to figure out ways to do the same for other indigenous languages across South Africa. And this is where collaboration with other institutions in the higher education sector comes into play. We have to work together to make this happen. We also have to think about the consequences that implementation of the policies has on a practical level in learning and teaching. Different faculties will have different requirements, and here flexibility is key. I've often spoken about the significance of agile institutions and how adaptability is necessary for universities to thrive. The actual circumstances of academic multilingualism should be in step with professional environments and expectations. In SU's case, there's a clause in our Language Policy 2016 regarding language planning that states the following: every faculty reviews its use of language for learning and teaching and records the language arrangements in its faculty language implementation plan annually at the least. This plan is reported to Senate via the faculty board and Senate's academic planning committee. Senate has the power either to accept the faculty's language implementation plan or to refer it back to the faculty. Once accepted, the language arrangements for learning and teaching of a particular module are published in the relevant module frameworks. So the implementation of a policy requires faculties and departments and all other internal structures of a university to interpret and use it accordingly. Implementing the new policy framework will therefore require institutions in the higher education sector to develop, sustain, and monitor extensive plans to promote multilingualism. And part of this includes setting up transparent mechanisms across all university structures to ensure this implementation, and not to just accept the policy framework on paper. But we believe this is possible in terms of SU's own language policy and analysis of the language implementation plans of faculties and the professional and administrative support services from 2017 to 2020 actually point to some positive trends. One is that the annual reporting and planning for language implementation through formalized mechanisms are becoming increasingly effective, because it not only ensures that faculties and past environments adhere to the formal provisions of the language policy 2016, but with the introduction of a template, it also allows environments to reflect on the consultation process that was followed and to include how they promote multilingualism in their respective environments. And our language planning and management committee's feedback on these reports and plans further stimulate discussion within their respective environments. And we believe that this has resulted in a shift from 2017 to 2021 in the conversation from a language rights to a language justice discourse. All of the challenges I've mentioned thus far, as well as the promotion of multilingualism, naturally also have financial implications. Paragraph 32 of the new language policy framework could have huge cost implications. It states, quote, all official, internal, institutional communication must be conveyed in at least 2 official languages other than English as a way of cultivating a culture of multilingualism. Institutions must consider all possible options to accentuate the use of indigenous African languages in official communication and ceremonies. This is certainly a laudable ideal, but depending on the definition of what is classified as official internal institutional communication, it could very well possibly not be financially viable. So how the terms of the policy framework will be interpreted by higher education institutions is a challenge in itself. And that's another reason why this colloquium is so valuable. The sense-making of what we can do as a collective is important here. So the financial impact of formalized multilingualism presents unique challenges, but it is crucially important to collaborate to find solutions. So in conclusion, implementing the new language policy framework will not always be smooth sailing, certainly not, but the benefits of multilingual education have been proven time and time again to outweigh the contrary. And in the South African context, I truly believe that a policy of multilingualism will give students broader access, more options, and a better future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. de Villiers. I personally enjoyed your candid take on the complexities of implementing a policy on multilingualism for higher education. Of course, this does not take away from the imperative that we have as institutions of higher learning. And as a product of Stellenbosch University myself, I was also impressed by the account that you gave of the efforts that the university has actually taken to implement multilingualism. The Mobilex, I've worked with the colleague that is Dr. Michelle Van de Meve on that and other initiatives. But there are questions for you, Prof, on which the delegates would like to engage you later on our Q&A session. At this stage, may I please invite Prof. Peterson from the University of the Free State. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nkomo. I missed, I think, the first hour of the colloquium, but have caught up, and I must say I was quite impressed with the discussions that has happened. This often is a very sensitive topic to discuss when we talk about language. It's sensitive, it's emotional, but it's important to have this discussion. So I'm going to be talking this afternoon not so much on the challenges. I think Professor de Villiers had lifted that out, but probably more about the opportunities presented by the new language policy framework in reimagining the idea of a university in Africa. Now, I don't want to go into detail about the new language policy framework. A lot of speakers have talked about it. I probably just wanted to highlight a few things in the new language policy framework, and that is to ensure that indigenous languages are developed and strengthened as languages of scholarship, teaching and learning, and also obviously engaging with communities and also engaging with one another as South African universities. But it also indicated that as indigenous knowledges, indigenous languages had the status of official languages, that they hasn't been afforded that official space as functioning as academic languages. And there had been a lot of discussions around those points that was mentioned in the new policy framework, a new language policy framework. But if we talk about language and an African university, what is needed? And I want to resonate with some of the introductory remarks that Professor Ahmed Bawa made. As universities, we are public institutions, and as public institutions, there's an expectation from universities. Universities should impact social change. Universities should engage with their societies. And the question is, to what extent do they engage with their societies, and how would they? And what would be a most comfortable way of engaging? So I think beside the excess focus, which also have been talked about a lot to campus, is not the access to only come onto our campuses, but also to gain a student experience, a staff experience of the culture of that institution. And that culture is often captured, very much captured, in the language and the local languages that is being taught and engaged with on the campus. So is the access part. You can talk about success, but I want to focus and want to bring across the student experience is quite important. And that student experience is often captured in the culture, in the content of our, I'm going to call it local languages, in which the university is situated. The second part, and that's also part of the debate for quite a long time in South Africa, but also in universities across the globe, and that is the whole issue of inclusivity. Inclusivity, the sense of belonging, and whether you use a language for social basis, or whether you use a language in curricula, or whether you engage on language issues, for me, that inclusivity part is quite important. And to what extent do we use languages to also ensure that inclusivity is rated and addressed properly on our university campuses, and specifically universities situated on the continent. Now, in discussions such as this, we can't ignore the whole issue of decolonization or Africanization on the one hand, and if I have to use a very sort of a simple explanation of decolonization, it's really to bring those voices that were sitting on the margins, to bring them into what we're doing as part of the DNA of our universities. And one could imagine that people, students and staff speaking different languages, coming from different cultures, would speak those different languages. What will be the value? What will be the lens? What will be the experience that they could bring in from either their own mother tongue or the experiences that they had through their languages into the debate, into the discussion, into the curriculum, into how we engage with our societies? And for me, is how do you unpack that as part of the social asset? And I believe that language can play a critical role in exactly that. Building better societies and better and just societies, and how do we contribute to economic development, is some of the key foci that I think a language and this language policy framework could also assist. But the point that is for me quite important, and we have used the term collaboration quite a lot in our engagements, whether it's in teaching and learning, whether it's in research, whether it's in engaged scholarship, and I think we're not doing enough to deepen that engagement amongst universities, that have designed and developed some interventions that could be useful in unpacking and understanding the critical role that language could play. But I want to move collaboration a step forward, and I want to use the term co-creation, because in the co-creation, you are forced to work together. You are probably not forced, but it is that sort of frame of working together and contributing from where you come from, your strength. And I think that multilingualism, different languages, can also assist to be able to get a better understanding of the type of solutions that we could provide. We often hear at universities about we need to be globally competitive, and I totally agree that as universities we need to be globally competitive, but we must never ignore our local context. And again, the local context is for me quite important. In the Free State, with the University of the Free State, the two local languages here that we would prioritize will be Sesotho and isiZulu. In Stellenbosch, in the Western Cape, it will be isiXhosa. And I think the experiences and the value that could bring in terms of the specific university and how they engage with their local environment is going to be quite important. And that is something that I think the new language policy framework also allow and also could be utilized for. As I was trying to unpack, if there is a link between language and economic success, and I haven't found really a good correlation, but as a university and also in some of the industries that I'm involved with, we work a lot with the African Trade Agreement, where 54 of the 55 countries in Africa are engaged with. And I was trying to reflect and to say, well, to what extent can language also assist in easing trade, in trying to build a much more stronger economic structure on the continent? And I do think that the value that language could play in that mustn't be underestimated, but there's probably some more work that one needs to do to be able to see how we can extract that. So multilingualism, as what the policy framework indicated, is an opportunity, is not a liability. And I think we often think about the financial aspect, and we shouldn't ignore that completely, because it's important in the implementation, as Professor de Villiers has indicated. But we shouldn't use that as a liability, and therefore the use and the creation of resources in indigenous languages will lead to what I think new research and a better understanding of one another. And what has come through in this colloquium, and the emphasis a lot on that, has been the issue of social cohesion. Now, the policy framework did highlight some limitations, and I'm not going to go through all of that. I think it did come out in some of the presentations and discussion. But the one that I would like to just highlight again, in the policy framework did see it as a critical component, and that is underscoring of partnerships between universities. So as the new language policy framework, as we engage with that, we must try to engage with that not on our own. We must try to engage with that, engaging, partnering with one another, because I think there's a lot of learnings, but that is also a way of financial optimization. If you start to partner together, you don't necessarily need to invest all of the financial resources, where you could share things that is possible. So if that is then what a university in Africa should strive for, what is the value and the inherent possibilities and opportunities locked in the policy framework. What are the things that we are doing at the University of the Free State then, just to underscore some of the aspects in the language policy framework? So we're promoting and creating conditions for the development of historically marginalized official languages, and I want to emphasize the sign language is very important. Universal access and the focus that we also put on sign language as a component of that. We also ensure students receive educational assistance in their mother tongue, where reasonably practically possible. We preparing sufficient language teachers, and we committed in our department or faculty of education, translators and interpreters to serve the needs of a diverse student society. And then we also protect the right of every person to use the language and participate in the cultural life of their choice at the university. So those are things that are mentioned and put in the policy framework. And those are the things, those four aspects I just wanted to highlight, we at the University of the Free State are quite involved with. So what we've done is we established an Academy of Multilingualism. And that Academy of Multilingualism, besides four key things that they're focusing on, they are also engaging and partnering with the faculties and with the teaching and learning managers in the faculties, looking at our current language policy, how we implement it, the monitoring, the evaluation, the report back, the response is critical, because sometimes one can get the sense that you pay lip service to your policy, and it's important for us to make sure that there is a constant focus on the implementation of the language policy. But we're developing Sesotho and isiZulu, as I indicated before, as academic languages. We're implementing multilingualism into our teaching and learning agendas. We're promoting multilingualism as a social asset. And then we also, critically important, advance English as a language of instruction. So in the development of Sesotho and isiZulu as academic languages, we do things like academic glossaries, as we have heard before. We utilize that extensively. We also partnering, and here we're partnering specifically with the University of KwaZulu-Natal on a multilingual academic publishing. We haven't done that yet, but we're partnering. It's still a project in development, and hopefully that will yield to an output as soon as possible. We're also looking at translations, and we've done that already, of PhDs, abstracts in African languages in our University of the Free State graduation booklets. And then we're launching more and more books written in African languages. And we're engaging with our Department of African Languages on a continuous basis. We furthermore are looking and developing voiceovers for digital lessons, whether it's in Afrikaans, whether it's isiZulu, Sesotho, or in sign languages, where groups of students have the opportunity to engage with one another in groups in their own mother tongue. And then we're looking at once again how that is converted to English on a later stage. We're implementing translanguaging in our classroom setups, and at the moment we're using one of those translanguaging tutor pilot projects to see how that works. And then we also have implementation of conversational modules in our professional programs. Accounting, in our Health Sciences faculty, we also use that. For us, as if we look at multilingualism as a social asset, in 2019 we started what we called a University of the Free State annual multilingual Mokete, and that is where we featured items in 8 different languages, official languages. And the idea was is not only diversity, but to celebrate diversity of our languages. Last year we couldn't do that due to COVID, but this year we've done that again, and we will continue with that, and also to make that also part and parcel of our multilingualism strategy as we go ahead. And then a project that is also quite important for us at the University of the Free State is what we call the I Can project, is where students, through short stories, they write stories in their own mother tongue. We also try to see how we can utilize some of those stories into the curriculum. So it's a contribution from students through multilingualism back into the curriculum. And that for us is also how we integrate the student voice in our curriculum. So for us, I think the last point, and I will wrap up, Dr. Nkomo, is that we also have to ensure that we look at the development of English as a language of instruction, as how do we strengthen English literacy, and we've got obviously a wealth of English academic literacy courses where students struggle in English. We expose that is complemented at the postgraduate level also with writing in our writing space, and also staff training through our Center for Teaching and Learning. And for us, this policy framework is just emphasizing the work that we already are doing, but is also creating further opportunities for what could be done. And we just have to make sure that we work through the practicality of how we're going to do it, but that we are fully committed to ensure that multilingualism is part and parcel of what a university in Africa should be, and how a university in Africa could contribute not only to themselves, but also to other universities in the globe, but also very critically to society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Peterson. May I please call Prof. Phakeng to give us her final talk before we wrap up the session. Welcome, Prof. Phakeng.
Thank you.
May I also remind the delegates that the biographies of the speakers are all in the program booklet, but there's just one thing that I would like to emphasize with Prof. Phakeng. Not only does she have a PhD in maths education, but the focus of her research has been on the role of language in maths education. May I not take so much time, Prof? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Don. I'm going to quickly go through the talk that I've prepared. I'm not sure how it's going to work, whether we have a conversation afterwards, but I'm quite open to that. I start with a quote from Flora Lewis, who said, learning another language is not only learning different words for the same things, but learning another way to think about things. This observation comes from the late American journalist Flora Lewis, who was the first woman to write her own regular column on the New York Times opinion page. For almost 60 years, she reported on and analyzed world-changing events in Europe and the Middle East for publications such as New York Times, The Washington Post, The Observer, The Economist, among others. And in 1981, Flora Lewis wrote, "Language is the way people think, as well as the way they talk, the summation of a point of view. People who use more than one language frequently find themselves having somewhat different patterns of thought and reaction as they shift. Some phrases cannot be translated, but grasping for an equivalent gives another perception of the world, which enlarges total vision. This is the great value of learning foreign languages. It goes far beyond the convenience of communication. And I'm sure many of us in the room who speak as an average South African 5 or more languages will relate to what Flora Lewis says. The government's introduction of the language policy framework for public higher education institutions offers us the opportunity to help transform not just the academy, but also South Africa by enlarging the total vision of our fellow citizens, giving our students and ourselves another perception of the world and our potential to help lead humanity's future. We at UCT launched the Multilingual Education Project in 2005 because we believed that proficiency in more than one South African language is an important step in unleashing the potential of our country's citizens to create a fair and just society. Our institutional policy recognizes English as the primary medium of teaching and assessment, except in language and literature departments, where another language is taught and may be used. But our policy values indigenous African languages, especially isiXhosa, which is a dominant language in this region, and Afrikaans in classrooms and other public spaces. I'm gonna digress a little bit here and say, as I go along, if I forget to mention this, I want us to be aware that in my head, I'm always working with 3 ideas of language: teaching a language, teaching in a language, and teaching about a language. And so I'll keep, I might, talk about across those things. But when I talk about teaching a language, I want us to flag this idea, this issue that that troubles me about teaching African languages in South Africa, that there are universities in our country that teach African languages in English. And I think this body should actually engage with that. It's when we talk about teaching a language, we also have to probe in which language that language is taught. We have the Senate Language Policy Committee, which was established also in 2005. And the Senate Language Policy Committee established a language policy task team in 2019 to lead the revision of UCT's language policy, beginning with the production of a briefing document for faculties that discusses the key principles to promote African languages for teaching and research. The starting point of UCT's language policy is the need to prepare students to participate fully in a multilingual society. The Multilingualism Education Project, which is housed within UCT Center for Higher Education Development, launched the Masithethe isiXhosa Xhosa communication course for staff and students taking the courses into residences and support departments, as well as into classrooms of disciplines such as law, philosophy, and psychology. Other multilingual projects include the development of multilingual online glossaries to promote subject concept literacy among students for whom English is not a main language, and assisting faculties in providing multilingual tutorials and study materials, especially at first-year level. To offset the high cost of professional translation into African languages, postgraduate students assisted with the translation of some tutorials. UCT's Disability Unit provides South African Sign Language interpreters for deaf students during lectures and at key university events such as graduation ceremonies. In 2015, the College of Accounting launched an online teaching platform, the first of its kind in South Africa, to help students learn key financial and accounting concepts in isiZulu and isiXhosa, as well as English. The aim is to graduate more Black accounting students and ultimately boost their numbers in the commerce sector. And so the platform is created to enable those students, students who understand whose home language is isiXhosa or isiZulu, to be able to interact with the concepts, the accounting concepts in their own languages. The platform is open to anyone interested in learning more about accounting and finance, because we believe higher education should reach beyond the university campus. So it's not only limited to UCT students. Various departments in humanities, such as sociology department, are researching African terminologies as academic and research terminologies. Historical studies staff are also working with archival text in African languages. Additional research in the Khoi and San Center is building digital archives, linking mother tongue languages with erased indigenous knowledge. An ambitious 3-year project began in 2020, and it aims to improve public access to place-based engagement with endangered African languages with a focus on the Khoekhoe and Nu, and this is specifically funded through the Vice Chancellor's discretionary funds. Such programs are just the first step towards developing a multilingual environment where all South African official languages, particularly those which have been historically marginalized, are afforded space to develop as languages of scholarship, research, as well as teaching and learning, as specified in the government language policy framework. We at UCT are foregrounding African languages across the university. The computer science department is developing data-driven isiZulu and isiXhosa spell checkers, for example. The School of Languages and Literatures conducts teaching and research on language, literatures, and cultural studies in 15 languages, including Sesotho, isiXhosa, Afrikaans, as well as special purposes teaching in African and isiXhosa. Among the school's research projects are studies of language learning in the African context, Xhosa linguistics, African oral traditions and orature, literature and cinema in Francophone West Africa, and translation of Southern African literature into French. Sephardi women's writers from the Maghreb, German colonial discourse in Africa, and German missionary writings, comparative perspectives on German African literature, creative writing in Afrikaans and Xhosa, lexicography, historiography, and media studies, among others. We offer 2 majors in the Faculty of Humanities, 2 majors in isiXhosa, one for the first language speakers and the other for isiXhosa as a foreign language. So there's 2 major, those majors running parallel. In 2016, since 2016, more than 550 students have enrolled in the initial isiXhosa communication course for non-mother tongue speakers. Over the same period, more than 140 students enrolled in isiXhosa language and literature studies, and more than 30 enrolled in the isiXhosa honors program. And by the way, we teach isiXhosa in isiXhosa, not in English. So whatever race students are, when they complete these courses, they have to be able to teach them in isiXhosa as well. Sesotho is currently offered only for the first and second year and has attracted more than 390 students. Teaching and assignments are conducted in the respective language of each course, Sesotho or isiXhosa, to give students as much exposure to the language as possible. The department is also planning a creative writing program in isiXhosa. isiXhosa English bilingual acting and voice courses in the drama department offer students a platform to use their home languages on stage. UCT's Ingqongqo digital platform provides a web-based forum for student discussions around first-year physical chemistry in any South African language. It contains links to videos and audio explanations and other resources posted by first-year students and the Ingqongqo community that relate to African experiences with chemistry. The plan is to compile these materials into an openly licensed online mixed media ebook co-authored by the students to allow for a fully inclusive look into first-year chemistry. Students in the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment are required to take a foreign language as an elective. Of course, a foreign language, as long as it's not their home language, they can choose to take Chinese or Spanish, but many of the students choose to learn a foreign language. They choose to learn isiXhosa, Sesotho, or Afrikaans because that's a requirement for them to get their degree in the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment. UCT's biggest initiative in Afrikaans and isiXhosa is the language program within our medical school, which we launched early in the century. Staff in the School of Languages and Literatures provide medical students with the language skills to converse with patients whose home language is either isiXhosa or Afrikaans, the two most common languages in the Western Cape besides English. A standard proficiency in these languages is a requirement to graduate. In 2008, UCT launched Clinical Skills CD-ROMs to help students with their language learning and improve their communication with patients. Our multilingual course materials on health sciences is available to other institutions through a Creative Commons license. This is in line with the government's objective to promote and strengthen the use of all African languages, all official languages, across all functional domains of public higher education, including scholarship, teaching and learning, as well as wider communication. The Faculty of Health Sciences aims to increase the use of African languages, particularly in isiXhosa, as legitimate tools for scholarship in the faculty, to improve the teaching of isiXhosa for communication, and to develop a clear policy on how second language English-speaking students can tap into mother tongue African languages for assessment and clinical practice. Staff research includes the Intern Language Survey from 2007 to 2011, and a pilot project on the integration of teaching of family medicine, clinical skills and languages. To participate fully in a multilingual society, our graduates need the language skills that are relevant for the professional disciplines that they will be entering. So UCT's multilingual education project offers isiXhosa for psychology, isiXhosa for human genetics, isiXhosa for architects. These courses are usually offered to honor students, as they are likely to do their coursework in Xhosa communities, and we want them to be able to communicate with the communities that they are collecting their data from. The number of students taking these courses has been growing steadily over the years, although of course during lockdown last year, it was difficult to continue with the courses remotely. Plans are underway to introduce isiXhosa for social development, isiXhosa for marketing and social work. As a global university in Africa, UCT recognizes the transformative power of African languages and the need for scholarship that is fluent not only in English, but also in the communities that scholarship and research are intended to serve. Universities have been tasked to develop capacities for marginalized African languages. At UCT, we've recently expanded our language offering with the language of the Khoi and the San peoples. We began teaching foundational Khoekhoegowab in collaboration with the Center for African Studies and the community around the campus, hosted by the UCT Summer School. The oral exam was moderated by a first language Khoekhoegowab speaker from Namibia. The program has since moved into the Faculty of Humanities San and Khoi Center, which was launched last year. The center will establish teaching and learning partnerships with colleagues in language development, education, and in African languages and linguistics. We plan to roll out an undergraduate Khoekhoegowab degree program in the next 4 years. And that program will not only focus on language. We are looking at language, the history of the Khoi people, the culture, the art, the language as well. And we're hoping to do that in the next 4 years. Meanwhile, the foundational certification course in the Khoekhoegowab language will continue. The initial 2 certification short courses attracted 182 students from a wide range of backgrounds. For instance, Emeritus Professor John Parkington in the Department of Archaeology at UCT specializes in research of the long-term hunter-gatherer settlement in the Fynbos biome of the Western Cape. And he took the initial Khoekhoegowab language course so that he could work more closely with the current community members to interpret works such as rock paintings. In this way, these people are able to contribute meaningfully to the study of their own history. Other students in the Khoekhoegowab language course are members of the indigenous community who are seeking to keep their language and culture alive, mothers who want to teach their language to their children because they have lost it, activists who are developing readers for 5-year-olds, youth organizations, staff who plan to teach the language as one of their activities. As the use of the conventional Khoekhoegowab grows, it can be revived as a living language. And we have found that some unemployment youth were able, with their certificate of completion, to apply for a museum internship and thus further engage the community in the Khoi and San culture. Revival of the Khoekhoegowab language offers opportunities to explore its interaction with other South African languages such as isiZulu, isiXhosa, and Afrikaans. It opens a new door of scholarship into the cultural history of indigenous peoples of the Cape. While the archives of UCT's special collections in the African Studies Library hold recorded works of great significance, many of which were salvaged during the fire, there is another archive that remains unexplored in the stories and memories of living Khoi and San leaders. This is one way that we as a university are hoping that we can unleash the potential of entire communities across South Africa, providing them with a platform based on their mother tongue to speak about who they are, to celebrate their living archives, and to contribute to the multifaceted identity of this country. As government policy states, Khoekhoegowab speakers, along with all other historically marginalized South Africans, need to be afforded the space to develop their own languages of scholarship, research, as well as teaching and learning. Conditions must therefore be created for the development of strengthening of indigenous languages, development and strengthening of indigenous languages as languages of meaningful academic discourse, as well as sources of knowledge in the different disciplines of higher education. And this prioritization of marginalized languages can offer healing to wounded communities that have been overlooked and despised in the past. This includes university students and staff members who are from these communities, and we know how people felt marginalized during the Fees Must Fall, Rhodes Must Fall protests. We have learned from that experience, and while we are not planning to do everything, whatever we are doing, we want to do it in such a way that it can have deep meaning for the culture, our culture and our history as a people. Thank you very much, Don. I'm going to pause there.
Thank you very much, Prof. Phakeng. This is the end of our sessions, but we do have about 8 minutes for Q&A. I had my own reflections on the presentations of the 3 speakers, but I think I would rather try to synthesize the questions that came in their direction and ask them to address us. There is the question on Afrikaans. In fact, a few questions on Afrikaans, and I think they were directed at Prof. de Villiers and Prof. Peterson. But some of those questions have already been dealt with in the previous sessions. So I don't think we'll spend maybe much time on them. One question though that I would read says, Prof. Peterson, would you agree that co-creation in local context implies also the acceptance of Afrikaans as part of SA? It is spoken in SA by members of all ethnic groups and a smaller white group.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the question was came from Annie Viljoen, and I would agree. I think the Afrikaans is one of the languages that we speak in South Africa. It might be spoken in some areas more than others, and where in the past the development of Afrikaans as an academic language might have been skewed in terms of resources that's been allocated to Afrikaans compared to some of the other indigenous languages. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't focus on Afrikaans also as a key language. So in terms of co-creation, absolutely, there's a lot that we can learn from Afrikaans as a language that we speak, so therefore the culture that comes with it, and as a language that we engage with our community. So I would agree with the comment, and I think we should just see how practically we utilize that in the context of the language policy framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I'll direct this question. It was not clear to whom it was directed, but I think Prof. de Villiers can take it. This question has to do with social justice in terms of how I interpret it. The delegate is asking if maybe in the interest of multilingualism and African languages in particular, we shouldn't be looking at funding and general support towards the intellectualization of the languages that are recognized within our constitution by sort of adopting an equitable approach, especially in terms of funding. And the delegate gave an example, says, for example, if funding is allocated for development of languages, shouldn't this be directed at previously marginalized African languages, say for a number of years, instead of Afrikaans, which is already developed but needs space to flourish rather than development like the other languages?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, I don't necessarily agree with that. It's debatable with that contention. But what I really liked about this discussion is is the richness in what flowed here from both Professor Peterson and Professor Phakeng, is that multilingualism as a social asset and as an instrument towards social cohesion. And I would rather frame it in terms of inclusive multilingualism, and also from what I stated earlier in my talk, where I think the strength of the language framework is the so-called the normalizing of multilingualism, and therefore the many examples that both Prof. Peterson and Professor Phakeng stated, it was actually heartwarming. It's very enriching to hear all the efforts that are already being undertaken to normalize and to systematize multilingualism. So I would actually like us to get away from this discussion about Afrikaans and this, because it's not an either or, it's an and. It's not an either or, it's an and and Professor Peterson has also mentioned this as this co-creation of these different opportunities for multilingualism. And I think we've all demonstrated that there's ample talent, there's ample enthusiasm, and there's a great deal of expertise to do this sort of thing. But we, again, going back to my remarks, it's implementation and it's funding. That's what I'm looking for from the state.
Thank you very much, Prof. de Villiers. There is a question that popped during Prof. Phakeng's presentation, especially when you were talking about the multilingual platform for accounting. The question goes, will the policy consider knowledge management, for instance, the multilingual knowledge management systems? I want to believe that universities can be located along the spectrum of conversion of knowledge, knowledge resources to multiple languages.
Yeah, I mean, the big issue, Dawn, I mean, I'm tempted to also talk to what Vem was talking about. I think when we talk about normalizing multilingualism, we should also be careful not to relegate African languages to social interaction only. It also has to be for academic purposes. That's where the issue is, right? And therefore, if we're saying conversion of other academic material into African languages, whilst it sounds good, I think the ideal actually is it possible? So what you have is not always the ideal point, in my view, is that it's not translation into African languages, that there will be texts that actually start in an African language and then they can be translated into something else. I mean, it's also an issue of power here of languages. But I think at the moment, what the College of Accounting has done with putting the different concepts in accounting and finance online in different languages is really what we hope all the disciplines manage to do. And with the unit that we have in Chad, we were able to do that, but also, of course, with the commitment and the buy-in of everyone in the university. That's ideal for every discipline, and it can be shared across the universities. I mean, I think if UCT has done it, we put it on Creatives with the Creative Commons license, everyone can get it. And another university will do something else, and then we can all share these resources. We don't have to redo the work.
Thank you very much, Prof. Phakeng. There is a question. I'll propose that maybe we take it up tomorrow, but for everybody to think about, how do you develop personnel capacity to teach these African languages? I think there's definitely scope for us to engage on that tomorrow. And then there is just one question. I'll try to sort of address it myself. The question asks whether the university language policies should not be informed by provincial language policies. I think to some extent, yes, but also the overarching national language policy that is in the Constitution. I really enjoyed, no, I didn't enjoy chairing this session. The session was really rich. I wish we had more time to actually engage on those issues. Lots in terms of what universities are doing emerged from these discussions. And I liked it in particular when Prof. Peterson spoke about the issue of lip service. This is what university leadership, including national leadership, have been accused of when it comes to the implementation of language policy. But I think the sentiments that I got personally from these discussions is that our university leaders are committed. I'm sure we'll get more of that tomorrow when we actually chart the way forward as far as the implementation of the new language policy framework is concerned. At this stage, I think I'll end and hand over to Professor Bawa to actually close this session. Thank you very much, deep VCs, and thank you very much, delegates.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Nkomo. And I really enjoyed that session. And our VC colleagues were absolutely fantastic. I thought that just listening to all the kinds of things that are going on really kind of provides us with a basis from which to understand how to take on this really major project, if you like. I'm not going to keep us very long, but just to try and summarize, we had 3 fantastic sessions today. But just to try and summarize to some extent, you know, as what transpired today. I mean, first of all, I think we just have to understand that, you know, we have a very dynamic university system. It's kind of constantly changing, constantly under pressure, responding to that pressure and so on. But it's also captured in historical narratives, right? And those narratives are, of course, contested. And to some extent, I think that we have to countenance when we think about the language issue, to countenance those historical narratives and to come to grips with how to address the language question, keeping in mind those historical narratives, if you like. And I think Professor Dr. Mabizela this morning, Vice Chancellor at Rhodes, I think really, you know, began on this very powerful note, which was that you have to take the lead from Chapter 2 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. I mean, you have to start there. And once you do that, you know, then things begin to open up, if you like, and things begin to seem more kind of more the pathways seem to be more open. But we have to start with Chapter 2 of the Constitution, and basically that means addressing the issues around the social ownership of our universities, trying to ensure that that people aren't excluded, not just excluded from participating in programs that universities offer, but in terms of really taking ownership of our universities and seeing their cultures and their lives and their languages represented in our universities, if you like. And I think that that's really, for me at least, a truly exciting kind of project, if you like. I think we heard a lot today from about the benefits of multilingualism and understanding that might require some interpretation in terms of our challenges in South Africa. But the benefits of multilingualism are clear, I think, and we have to take that into account. I think that raises a whole big issue around basic education, just kind of really saying to what extent, can we address the issue of multilingualism in the South African context? I'm not talking now about foreign languages, but South African languages. To what extent can we address that with the current kind of functioning of our basic education system, and how do we kind of address that as a university system? And I think that what we heard today was the issues around access, success, and so on. But I think we have to also focus in, and I'm hoping that tomorrow we will address this issue, that this is also about the knowledge production enterprise at our universities. This is seriously about kind of addressing, unleashing, if you like, knowledge from knowledge systems which are locked out of our dominant kind of research paradigms at the moment, and understanding that we are a society with multiple knowledge systems which kind of intersect with each other. And the question really is, and those are interwoven into, I think Professor Phakeng spoke about that beautifully, I think. Those are totally interwoven into the kind of the language contexts and so on. One of the most important things perhaps is that we have to think about developing African languages as languages of scholarship, languages of academic discourse and so on, and that this is really tied into their long-term viability and their growth and development, and that's something that can only happen at universities. That we have to take on that challenge. I think we heard today, especially from Professor de Villiers, that the major challenge is really the challenge of implementation, and finding the will and the political will, the leadership will, and the resources to ensure that we do make progress with the implementation, if you like. And I think that ultimately there are two major challenges here. The first one is this: it is ultimately a social justice issue which we have to take up and we have to address. And the second, of course, is the issue around nation building, social cohesion, and so on. And I think that it would be a risk, I think, for us to imagine that this is just a project of the universities, but that this is universities working with a whole range of other players, and in particular getting the basic education system to function in a slightly different way. So I think that it's been an absolutely fantastic day. We're scheduled to end at 17:20, it's 17:23 now. So I'd like to just say what a fantastic day it has been, and to thank, first of all the presenters and the chairs, and also to thank all the delegates that were participating. I understand at some point we're almost at 200 people participating, which is excellent, and looking forward very much to tomorrow. Thank you so much, colleagues, and trust that you have a good evening, and see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much. Bye.